All right, so we are going to get started here. Slideshow. All right, nice to see you, everyone. I am Kara Rice, creator of Brain Connects Therapy. I'll do an intro in just a second. But so here we're going to talk about getting to the root cause of your child's behavior, sensory, and learning challenges. We're really going to look at how purposeful movement with the proper sensory stimulation can ultimately change the brain using neuroplasticity. So just a little tiny bit about me. I am an occupational therapist. I have a degree in kinesiology as well. I actually worked for several years with adults with traumatic brain injuries and strokes, etc. And went into pediatrics after my own child. My son had issues with his development. So developmental delay, low muscle tone. All of the experts told me he did not have autism. He would grow out of it. And that never happened. He got therapies from the get-go. At 6 months of age, he was doing PT, speech, all the traditional things. After years of doing this, I just was not impressed of any kind of significant changes. And I knew there had to be something else out there. So I studied, learned about primitive reflexes, late night Google searches, and studied a bunch of different methods. I resonated with Dr. Melillo's approach using a functional disconnection hemispheric balance approach with primitive reflex integration. I also found it to be the easiest to implement and the easiest to teach parents, which is why I went on to be certified by him. And that's even though I know a bunch of other techniques, I do like his the best, and I do implement them the most. I started Brain Connects Therapy because I knew other parents didn't have the information, because I didn't have the information, and I was a therapist. We weren't taught it in school, and most OTs don't know it. And that's the first thing that you're told to go to is OT or ABA. And anyway, so I decided to start sharing, and it just grew from here. So these are different signs of an underdeveloped nervous system. Does your child struggle with learning challenges, developmental challenges? Do they have short attention span, hyperactivity, behavior issues, or emotional dysregulation, poor social skills, nonverbal communication issues, difficulty with any academics, any delays in developmental milestones, sensory issues are related, motor skill, fine or gross motor delays, poor coordination and balance. All of these different symptoms are signs that there's an underdevelopment in the nervous system, and that we can fix that. We can help that. So when you first go to, just to kind of give you a different view of traditional medical treatment versus bottom-up neurological treatment. So traditional medical treatment, if a child is struggling kind of in infancy or toddlerhood, they might get early intervention from therapies, they might get a diagnosis. If you have a child that's a little bit more on the autism spectrum looking, they'll probably tell you to go to ABA, maybe tell you to go to OT. If your child is more in ADHD range, they'll give you some medicines. Dyslexia, they'll start reading interventions. These are kind of just traditional medical treatments that are based on very old research, very old standards. They just are not up to date on what is new and what can actually change the brain. So even especially in school, this is another big one I talk about a lot with parents, is their kids can be struggling and might have retained reflexes, but the schools aren't going to do much about it. They typically want to refer out to outside therapy. So all of these treatment models are very top down. They look at the problem without looking at the cause. They're basically trying to manage the symptoms and behaviors in the here and now, versus they don't even believe that you can change the brain to fix the problem. They think whatever your diagnosis is, it's long-term, you have it forever. They're just trying to manage things. Whereas in our approach, using a neurological approach to treatment, we actually think we can change the brain, and even sometimes make diagnoses disappear, or symptoms completely disappear. Happens all the time. So neuroplasticity means that the brain is plastic. Basically, it can change, and it can change at any age. So the bottom-up approach, we are trying to find the cause. Instead of treating symptoms like the traditional model, we look at the source. So instead of seeing a child that's running around, can't sit still, and putting a weighted vest on him and having him jump up and down, because that can help maybe in the short term with the symptom, But when we look at a child, we see that symptom and we say, why can't he sit down? Why can't he control his body? Well, because he has poor body awareness, poor proprioception, which is all underlying with primitive reflexes. So we're looking at changing the root cause to eliminate that symptom rather than just manage it. So these are movement-based treatments. We basically are going through movements we had during infancy that helps to rewire the brain and build new neural connections. With neuroplasticity of any type, whether it's with kids or adults or whoever, you need frequency, intensity, and duration for the brain to change. So I'm saying what that means is we are working with kids 5 days a week, doing an intense model for several months. And this is one thing to point out, that a therapist that you see one time a week is not going to be enough. This is why I teach parents how to do these activities, because it has to be done on a regular basis for a set amount of months for the actual optimal change in results. With these exercises, these movements, taking this neurological approach, we will fill in any gaps of developmental delay. So we'll see this. So like top down or bottom up, we kind of, which style would you want to do? Just a little analogy. If you were building a house, you would never build the roof first without putting a foundation in. And that's what the traditional medical treatments do. They kind of start at the top and they don't worry about the bottom. They don't even think they can fix the bottom. Whereas we start at the bottom knowing we can change, and it just cascades and changes all of the above level skills that a child has. So we can see this pyramid, and this is kind of how we work bottom up, is this pyramid of development and learning that we've adapted. At the bottom is our nervous system with our primitive reflexes. And once our primitive reflexes are fully integrated, then our sensory systems are fully integrated. So they integrate with the primitive reflexes. Then we can have our postural reflexes start to emerge. We can get better balance, better hand-eye coordination, good body awareness. Our visual motor skills will start to develop better. Then we get better attention and focus, behavior, more independence, better auditory listening skills. And finally, at the top is our cognitive skills, reading, learning, math. So if we don't build that base foundation, which is the same for every child because we all went through the same reflexes, although some kids might have different ones retained. And if we don't build that, then there's going to be gaps in this pyramid somewhere. And this is where kids can look different. So one child might have poor balance and poor visual motor control, while another just has really bad reading skills. Another doesn't have good body awareness. So all of their symptoms look different, but the root cause remains the same, that the central nervous system, the brainstem area, is not fully developed. So why bottom up? From the beginning, our brain develops bottom up. So this is the natural way that our brain grows. The brainstem develops first. This is our survival brain. And once we develop that survival brain, it lays the foundation so that the prefrontal cortex, or our thinking brain, is able to develop. So if our survival brain stays on, so that's what happens when we have retained reflexes or unintegrated reflexes, our cognitive brain does not have full control of the body. It does not have full control of its thoughts. And so that's when we have emotional dysregulation, behavior challenges. It doesn't understand sensory information as a child would if everything was laid correctly in the foundation. So an immature brainstem leaves an underdeveloped cortical brain. So that means it's going to be harder for learning, for math, for reading, for memory, for organization. You know, each child's going to look different, but it's going to be more difficult. It's also going to be more difficult to inhibit their responses. And this is where we have behaviors where a child might hit or be aggressive or talk out of turn all the time, and they can't be quiet because they can't stop themselves. So this is all signs of an undeveloped brainstem. The brain grows and develops via sensory and motor input. So and this is how the reflexes work. Sensory input comes in, that's noises, sounds, touch, movement. The brain processes that, and then automatic motor output comes out. This happens over and over and over during infancy until the brain develops enough that it has full control over the body. So when that doesn't fully happen for whatever reason, there's lots of different causes out there. We don't have that full control. We also need a balance between the right and the left hemispheres. So not only does our brain develop bottom up, but it also develops horizontally. So right and left hemispheres have to have a good balance and have to communicate together, have good inter-hemispheric communication for optimal learning and behavior. So what does it look like when this isn't happening? So a brain that's disconnected from its body. This is what we call kind of functional disconnection, a lack of communication between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And this is going to look like different symptoms for different kids. But typically when this happens, one side is a lot more advanced. So you might have a child, and we see this a lot, who's extremely smart with math, but they can't sit still. They have no body awareness. They can't even control. They can't jump with 2 feet. They can't ride a bike, but they're like extremely smart in math. They're hyperlexic. Maybe they were reading when they were 2 years old, these amazing skills. Or a lot of times we'll see the other, where a child has really good gross motor skills and are very advanced as an athlete, but they're dyslexic and they can't read. And so they can go different ways. So the brain really controls everything. So we can really affect even allergies, the immune system, our mood, our food sensitivities when we balance the hemispheres. Another thing to note about the differences between the hemispheres is that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere both take in sensory input. They both take in tactile input, auditory, vestibular, all of it, but they take in different types. So for example, with sound, the right hemisphere processes more low frequency sounds. The left hemisphere processes more high frequency sounds. And if they are not balanced, so one is way stronger than the other, the information coming in from sound is going to be skewed or disorganized. Once they get more balanced, because we strengthen the weaker side, then they can talk to each other and understand the harmonious kind of balance between each other to understand that sensory information. So research also has shown, which I like this research, it showed that kids that had developmental delays, neurodevelopmental delays, had like autism, ADHD, I think they looked at OCD and dyslexia as well, had hubs of neural networks that were disorganized within the brain compared to a typical peer age. But the interesting thing about the study was that the researchers did not know whose MRI was the child's diagnosis. So they could not tell based on the disorganization, whether it was a child that had autism or an ADHD or dyslexia or OCD. They couldn't tell. They just knew that it was all disorganized, and each one looked different, just different disorganization and different from the typical kids. So what that tells us is this is the root cause of all of these different types of functional disconnection disorders. These neurodevelopmental disorders all just have disorganization in the brain. There's no genetic, this is minus if your child doesn't have any genetic issues, they have no malformations or other physical issues. It's just disorganization within the brain. If that's all it is, then we can change that. We can start to work on that. So different symptoms, one cause, one solution. Child disorders, they're really, these neurodevelopmental disorders are pretty prevalent now. They're all related, and that's what that study really shows. As we develop the brain from the bottom up, we replicate our natural development, and we can see improvements in all developmental areas. So things like communication, learning, motor skills, social skills, behavior, sensory processing will all improve. So what is primitive reflex integration anyways? Primitive reflexes, just to touch on this, are foundations of the nervous system, as we said. They lay the foundation in order for us to learn to integrate the senses, and they're the basis for all of our motor skills. And motor is what builds the brain, so movement builds the brain. When they're unintegrated, they can trigger our fight or flight system, which is our survival brain. And when we are in this fight or flight and our body thinks we're unsafe, we act out. We have really big emotions. We're really reactive. We can't sit still and listen to the teacher because that noise from the air conditioner going on makes us a little bit scared, makes our brain go, are we safe? Whereas kids who are fully developed, their cognitive brain can override all of this other information that's coming in, and they can pay attention and they can sit still. So that's the big difference between kids with retained reflexes and unintegrated reflexes. So once they integrate, it allows our body parts to move independently. So when they're retained and they haven't been fully integrated, we don't move. We do move as more of a unit. So if I turn my head, my shoulders might turn a little bit with it. It might not be very pronounced. For some kids, it's very pronounced. You see a huge movement when you turn a head, or you turn certain, depending on how you test the reflex, you can see the entire body part just want to move with it. So you don't have full control of your body. And that's a huge thing, especially for kids that are non-speaking autism, that are more severe end of autism. They really don't have this connection to their body, even where I've heard Dr. Melillo talk about a child he worked with who named his body a different name because he felt so disconnected from it. This basically gives us increased amount of effort to perform any task. So if I'm sitting there listening in class, and now we're talking about a little more higher level kid, maybe with dyslexia, and I'm looking up at the board and I'm copying down on my paper and looking up and copying down on my paper, I'm triggering my symmetrical tonic neck reflex. And if it's unintegrated, I might start to slump in my chair a little bit over time. And it's not because I'm personally doing that because I'm tired or something. It's because my body is automatically doing that. And it's making it harder for me to learn because I'm like, my body's doing stuff while I'm trying to pay attention. So this basically leaves us with gaps in development, which will make it hard for kids to coordinate their body, learn new skills, socialize with their peers. So just a few examples of some of the big ones we work with that people might know, just so you can understand it, how it relates to sensory input too. The Moro reflex is this one where the baby opens their arms and starts to cry, usually when they get wet or there's a loud noise that makes them scared. So it's a sudden change in head position or sensory input. This is our fight or flight response, very associated with hypersensitivities to sensory input. This is that sympathetic nervous system response where we feel unsafe, anxious, depressed, if we still have it retained. Asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, this one is associated with hearing, binocular vision, gives us awareness of both sides of our body and crossing midline. Most of the kids who have a homolateral pattern where they can't cross midline very well definitely have the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex retained. Very strongly associated with dyslexia and other learning challenges, and it's big for eye-hand coordination and building visual skills. The symmetrical tonic neck also trains vision, eyes to focus near and far. Horizontal visual tracking helps prepare our spine for upright posture. Spinal galant is one that helps to create a balance between both sides of the body. This one's very related to tactile sensitivity, especially of clothes, bedwetting past the age of 5. Mostly kids will have this retained. It's very important for developing whole body coordination. So let's look at, so we talked a little bit about the foundation, which is our primitive reflexes, also core and postural stability. Now let's talk about, I said, so the brain develops bottom up, but now it also develops right to left. So we need to look at both sides of the brain. So we know as adults, a lot of us are a little bit more on one side or the other. Maybe I'm more creative and you're more detail oriented or vice versa, but we have a balance between both sides enough that there's no issues with incoming information. A child that has a functional disconnection is one that has an extremely strong skill on one side, or really extremely detail oriented, very literal, very practical on one side, and the opposite on the other. So don't have imagination, don't have good social skills, are more avoidant. So you see a really big difference between the hemispheres, and kids that have these kind of challenges have that. So what do we look at? So when the brain hemispheric balance portion of of working from a root cause approach is, we call it a functional disconnection. As I said, sensory input to the brain becomes skewed because both hemispheres are taking in the information, but only one is totally processing it, but it's only hearing some of the information, or feeling some of the information, or smelling some of the information, because that's where we have all the senses are processed on both sides of the brain, but in different ways. So we combine sensory input to the weaker hemisphere with motor output, just as we did during infancy, to help develop and balance the brain. Another big thing to think about with this hemispheric imbalance, we see a lot. Another example is that the right hemisphere is kind of our go, go, go hemisphere, and our left hemisphere is the one that tells us to stop and inhibits our movements and things. So this is why a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times kids with autism, ADHD are more right hemisphere weak. Oh, I think I mixed that up. Sorry. Our left is our go, our right is our stop. So they're more right hemisphere weak, where they don't have that ability to stop or inhibit, whereas the left is go, go, go. And that's where they're strong at. And these kids like don't stop in traffic, or they will jump off of something super high, or they can't stop themselves from stimming a motor movement or a sound because they don't inhibit it like they should, because their brain is not balanced. So we need that brain to be in a harmonious state so that we can have full top-down cortical regulation for our emotions, socialization, learning behaviors. So once we develop bottom up and right to left, then our cortical brain develops, and then it has full control of everything. So that's the ultimate goal of what should really happen in typical development. What can look like from a weakness standpoint. With a left brain weakness, we can have poor memory, depression, feeling guilty or shame, difficulty with low frequency sounds, difficulty with reading comprehension, usually dyslexia, tends to be clingy, gets sick easy, more weak immune system, poor at math. Now, of course, every child that has a left brain weakness doesn't have every single symptom. These are just some of the most common symptoms. A right brain weakness will be stuck in details, hyper-focused, overactive, impulsive, very concrete in thinking, poor sense of humor. This is poor attention. This is pretty typical of autism, ADHD, sometimes sensory processing as well. But we do testing to make sure that we're using the right hemisphere, which one is weak and which one is strong. Okay, so what can you do at home to help your child? So really this is the thing, and this is why I teach, is that parents need to do the work. You can see a professional, absolutely, one time a week or however, for intensives, but you need to follow that up, because this again takes frequency, intensity, and duration to create change. So you need a brain healthy lifestyle, which means just good food, outdoor time, decreased screen time, less than an hour a day, especially no screens for kids under 6. We need to have healthy whole foods. We need to have good sleep. We need to have not stress in the environment, parents not fighting, things like that. We need to have a really nice, healthy lifestyle where you're active every day to help give that brain the foundation to learn. And then we need to calm the nervous system. Some kids are already calm, so depends. Some kids that are very in fight or flight and have very extremely retained reflexes need this calming first. Then we integrate our primitive reflexes and balance the brain hemispheres. And then once we do that, we organize the neural pathways, those hubs we talked about. And then after that, we need to connect and strengthen and myelinate those new neural pathways with additional work, just continuing up that pyramid of development and learning to create the most change. So our approach at Brain Connects Therapy, we use movement-based drug-free approaches to help do this, fill in the gaps of development and rewire this inner hemispheric connection. So what can we expect? What can we expect at home? So here's a study that was done just recently at Harvard McLean Hospital on ADHD using this at-home method, this Melillo method at home. So the kids who completed this was 16 weeks daily work. They had significant reductions in hyperactivity, greater cognitive attention, reductions in oppositional behavior. Their connections across the brain were significantly improved in emotions, language processing, memory, concentration. Amazing, right? And not only did this happen in 16 weeks, but these gains were still there 7 months later. So what they showed on the MRIs was that the brains were actually changed. Whereas when these kids were compared to kids with Ritalin or have been compared to kids that are on a low dose of Ritalin, and they have the same effects of Ritalin, except without all the side effects of a drug, and the fact that the brain changed so that the child would never need the drug, right? Would never need medication. So of course, this one's only on ADHD, but there's many studies on autism, not specifically on the Melillo method, but on primitive reflexes. and some of the brain hemispheric balance, and just we still see the same gains, but sometimes it can take longer just because kids with autism tend to be a little bit more delayed than ADHD. Let's look at some case studies of clients I have worked with personally. So these are not their names or their pictures, but everything else is true. So this is a 6-year-old girl that had dyspraxia, poor coordination, and motor planning. I don't think she actually had a diagnosis. She was incontinent at 6, unable to dress independently, unable to balance with her eyes closed, difficulty positioning her body in space, and limited social interaction. After just 4 weeks of doing this at home every day, she was able to put her shirt on and off independently. She could tell front from back. She was continent with urine. Social interaction increased, and her language developed quicker. So great. I mean, you don't typically get that from OT, 4 times, once a week. Case study 2, this is a 5-year-old boy. He did not have a diagnosis either. He was underdeveloped gross motor skills, fine motor skills. Is a very picky eater and poor coordination. After just 4 weeks, he was riding a 2-wheel bike. Couldn't even pedal. He was staying on the lines while cutting, had a good pencil grip. He stopped having meltdowns. He had normalized his voice, so was able to inhibit and calm his voice down. And something to think about with this kiddo is we didn't teach in the exercises. I wasn't teaching him how to ride a bike or how to do better handwriting. They just developed because the child's brain and body developed. And then the skills naturally came. So that happens a lot where we see these skills just naturally come that should have been there or would have been there with a typical child, a typically developing child. And as we develop the brain, those things start to come. And then Mary, she was a 5-year-old girl who had CP and intrauterine stroke. She wasn't even using her right arm at all for any activities. It kind of hung there like an old adult stroke. She was incontinent with urine, little to no imaginative play, limited social. After just 4 weeks, she became continent. She began independently using her right arm during tasks. So just as a functional assist, she just started using it, and then increased imagination, social interaction, improved balance. And again, we weren't working on anything. I was not doing anything specific for the right arm. We were just doing developmental movements of an infant over and over and over again. And her brain started to develop these skills on its own. So nothing happens until something moves. Pretty famous cute quote. So what can we do to have similar results? We can use Brain Connects therapies, 3-step approach, our calm, integrate, and connect. So what are those? Quick summary of what a root cause approach is. Sorry, we'll get into that other one next. A root cause approach. So we start from the bottom up to get optimal function. Then we integrate the reflexes. With primitive reflex integration, we also develop muscle tone using core and postural stability, because the better postural stability we have, the quicker the reflexes integrate and the better the brain processes inputs. Then we also develop the right to left, the brain hemispheric balance by inputting the weaker hemisphere with specific sensory stimuli to help develop that balance. After that, after we've done those 2 big pieces, we start to strengthen those new neural pathways with higher level skills that require balance and vestibular and visual systems working together. But the best part is you can do this at home. And you should, because it's your child, you know how they work. You can do this work at home with them. You can see the changes. There are simple movements that can be done by anybody. Okay. Oops. So our virtual programs, we have Calm, that calms the nervous system, preps the body. We have Integrate, which is our at-home Malolo program, which is reflex integration and brain balance. And we have Connect, a monthly movement membership for higher level skills after the reflex integration. So Calm is a listening program called Safe and Sound that we use. It specifically targets the vagus nerve and helps to create a balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It's beautiful for kids that have extreme emotional dysregulation, are not sleeping well, have major fight or flight or anxiety. It works really good for those kids. Kids that don't have those don't really need to do this portion, but it's great to help prep the nervous system. You get access for 60 days. You get 3 playlists. So 3 members of your household can participate in the program. It's definitely recommended. The parent, the co-regulator to the child, does the program too, so that you both are calm. Then our integrate program. We teach you step by step how to integrate the core primitive reflexes, how to determine the weaker hemisphere, how to do all the extra core stability and sensory inputs to help get these things done quicker. We have a group support in Facebook. It takes approximately 30 to 45 minutes a day to complete, recommended 5 days a week. You could do 7. You can always add on individualized help with me if you want. Or, you can get step-by-step approach straight from the guided program. And then our Connect Brain training. This is kind of the last little piece that we developed, the cerebellum. I created these movements that are progressive and activate the integration of the vestibular, proprioceptive, and visual systems together, which really develops the cerebellum, which develops automated movement so that there's more freedom in the cortical brain. So this really improves learning, behavior, attention, and coordination. It only takes about 20 minutes. They're a lot shorter, a little bit more fun than the reflex work over time because we use different balls and bean bags and things to catch and throw. And it's a monthly payment. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me via email, brainconnects@gmail.com, or check out my website for more details. Thank you.